Welcome. You're listening to This Leader, the podcast. If you lead people and are seeking the transformational, high-impact secrets that will lead to greater joy and fulfillment in your work, will optimize your team performance, and will help you create a happy, highly productive workplace, then you are this leader and you're in the right place. I'm your host, Claire Laughlin, and each week my guests and I will explore the mindsets, techniques, and actionable strategies that will help you build the career, team, and organization of your dreams. Because I believe no one should have to suffer in a dysfunctional workplace. Let's get started. Hello, friend. How are you feeling today? What are you feeling today? If hearing that question feels a little odd or uncomfortable, then today's episode is for you because we're going to talk all about feelings, why they're so important for you as a leader, how to identify them and build your emotional vocabulary, and how to work constructively with your emotions so that you can enjoy all the richness that life has to offer. So let's go back to that question I just asked. When I'm teaching, I often ask my audiences this question. I'll pause after an exercise or before a break and just do a check-in. I say, let's go around. I want to know how you're feeling in 1 or 2 words. And the only words I don't want to hear are good, fine, and okay. Almost every time, after an awkward silence, people respond beautifully to this question. They might laugh or, just for a second, but then they start coming up with wonderful words like excited, relieved, tired, exhausted, apprehensive, thoughtful, considerate, energized. They come up with all kinds of rich descriptions. And I love this exercise, and I do it in every class as a way of pausing and checking in and building a habit of staying connected with our feelings. I personally use this exercise daily. So some days I'll ask myself the question a dozen times or more. I just pause and I take a breath and I consider, how am I feeling? What am I feeling? My best days are the days that I ask myself that over and over and I attend to the answer. Because you see, emotions are rich and they're complex. And as a leader, it's imperative that you develop a broad emotional vocabulary and you consistently work on being emotionally intelligent. This is a game changer for us humans, but it has particular importance when you lead others. So today, I want to start by talking about why this is all so important, and then we'll discuss ways that you can build your emotional vocabulary from wherever you are now. And after that, we're going to talk about how to work with your emotions so they can serve you and enhance your relationships, and so we don't get stuck. So let's dig in. First, let's talk about why growing our emotional intelligence is so imperative. First and foremost, right? Emotions are a beautiful part of life. Positive, negative, strong, and subtle. Emotions are our guide, and they can tell us what really matters to us and what we deeply value. They help us determine what's driving us. They help us make sense of the world, and they keep us safe. They protect us from danger and alert us to threats. And though many of us have grown up with the message that, hey, there's no room for emotions at work, like check your emotions at the door, I've got news for you. They show up anyway. So it's a much better strategy to learn to tap into the wisdom of emotions and practice regulating ourselves so we can bring the best to each situation and lead the way for others. In fact, if we don't attend to our emotions, they are very likely to sneak up and derail us in the most inopportune ways. Because when we're disconnected from our emotions, we're disconnected from our power, okay? From our power as leaders, from our power as humans, right? And when we're not conscious of our emotions, we might try to protect ourselves from things that really aren't a threat. And that self-protection can hold us back from being courageous and honest. That can create a destructive cycle, and it can really impede our relationships. So much has been written on this and studied about this starting way back in 1995, when Daniel Goleman first published his book called Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ, right? I remember actually sitting in a lecture in 1995 with Daniel Goleman about this very topic, and I was fascinated and relieved too, because I was so happy to hear that there was talk about this coming into, a workplace type of scenario. So since then, the theory of emotional intelligence has expanded greatly. It's been applied in a vast number of practical studies linked to brain health and spiritual growth, and shown to be a key driver of career success and in all aspects of life. Okay. There's also great assessments now that can measure your levels of emotional and social intelligence. And basic exposure to these concepts has been integrated into our educational system, as well as being really routine in workplace training programs. So, in fact, a particular study from the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence confirms that leaders who can accurately identify and effectively manage their emotions consistently outperform those who can't. They make better decisions, they build stronger relationships, and they create more engaged teams. We all know this. We've all worked with people who are emotionally intelligent and those who are not. And we know the difference on a really gut level. But here's the thing, you can't manage what you can't name. So, how do we build a more expansive emotional vocabulary? Well, it's quite simple, really. Add words. Add more words. Another exercise I do when I teach courses specifically on emotional intelligence is that I ask folks to write down as many feeling words as they can in 2 minutes. So I set a timer, and most people land around 14 or 15 words. The highest number I've ever seen in 2 minutes was 32 words, and the lowest was about 6. So we all seem to know the basics, right? Mad, sad, glad, afraid, something like that. But those are just the beginning. And stopping there is a great disservice to all of us. Each of those emotions has nuance and intensity. And an easy way to explore is to get yourself a really beautiful emotion chart. They're so colorful and descriptive, and you can find them lots of places. You can find them on Etsy and Pinterest, or just search for emotion list on Google. This could be really helpful as you build your emotional vocabulary, and it can just help when your emotions are strong and you want to understand and be able to regulate them a little better. For example, you might think you feel angry, right? Our initial thing would be like, oh, I'm angry. But looking at an emotions list might help you identify something deeper, like frustrated or bitter, resentful, indignant, furious, jealous, annoyed, withdrawn, or skeptical. Okay. Or you might think you feel happy, but upon a little deeper reflection, you might notice that it's a mix of proud and peaceful, courageous, creative, and thankful. So if you want to take a look at one of these charts, check out, like I said, you can go on Google. I like one called feelingswheel.com. It's really pretty. And I highly recommend the book, Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown. I just love that book. It's gorgeous. It's descriptive. It's beautifully written and illustrated. And it describes a wide range of emotional words that really enrich our lives. So I love that book. And if you're into this, I give that for gifts sometimes. It's a really nice addition to any library. So, beyond just broadening your vocabulary, which is a great start, you want to build a habit of labeling and validating emotions, yours and other people's too, because validation is a very strong tool. So, try this. Just pause throughout the day now and then and do a little self check. Take a deep breath and check in. What am I feeling? Try to get past the basics and into more of the subtle emotions, and check out that chart. And then here's a power move. Consider the story that you're telling yourself that leads to those emotions. Like if you're feeling proud, consider why. What are you proud of? If you're feeling anxious, pause and listen to the words that accompany that emotion. What is that emotion alerting you to? What is that feeling of anxiety trying to protect you from? If you're feeling peaceful, what is it that gives you that sense of peace? This practice can help us validate our emotions, but also regulate. Let me give you an example. So earlier, when I was preparing for this podcast, I was thinking about you and I was thinking about this topic. I felt a mix of a lot of amazing emotions like excitement and exhilaration and creativity, energy, and deep gratitude. And I can trace all those feelings back to a story. And the story is that, man, I've wanted to do this for so long, and I'm so happy to have this channel to communicate with you. I'm also deeply appreciative of having the freedom and flexibility to bring this podcast to life after thinking about it for so many years. And it helps a lot that the feedback I've received has been very supportive and positive. But here's the truth. Every time I prepare an episode, I also feel a little bit of fear, a little apprehension, and some anxiety that probably comes from my perceived risk of overexposure. Why? Because I've never done anything quite like this before, and I'm a pretty private person. I fear that I might say something that upsets someone or something that's misinterpreted or misunderstood or won't be good enough. So it feels risky, right? Every time. And all of these emotions are true and valid. But then I need to decide what to do with all of that, right? Sitting with the feelings, understanding them, getting to know that whole landscape is really, really important. But those feelings of fear and apprehension and anxiety stood in my way for many years. Like whenever I thought about starting a podcast, I'd think, oh, I don't want to be out there. Like people won't like it. I won't know what to say. And then I'd follow with excuses like, well, I don't have the time or I can't possibly take on something like that. And I let those stories block me from taking action. Were these feelings valid? Were the stories true? Sure, there's a bit of truth in everything, right? Those stories felt logical and very real for many years. But eventually, I sat with those feelings and I asked myself, wait, what if I am ready? What if I try? What am I believing that's holding me back? What if I start? And I acknowledged the fear and anxiety, but I didn't let those feelings dictate my actions. My point is, we have some agency here. And when we get to better understand our emotions and the stories we're telling that lead us in one direction or another, we can make more informed and clearer choices based on what we want to create. Okay? Because it was only when I began focusing on what I could do and telling myself a different story that I started to feel the courage and excitement that I really needed to take action. So, here's a powerful framework for working with emotions. First, I want you to practice regular self-check-ins. Print an emotion wheel and place it somewhere visible. Pause during the day to take a deep breath and ask, how am I feeling? Push beyond good, fine, or okay. Like between us, please do this at home as well as at work because it's so important for the health of every relationship. Second, trace those emotions backwards in a sense without judgment. Ask yourself, what is the wisdom in this feeling? What is it trying to tell me? Your feelings are wise, but they may be coming from places of fear or self-protection that we don't need anymore. Okay? Third, explore the story. Ask, what is contributing to this feeling? What story am I telling myself? What am I focusing on that's eliciting these feelings, right? And I'm guessing that whatever you're focused on is true and real, but it's not the whole story. So finally consider, are these feelings serving me and my relationships? Is this serving what I want to create in my life? Am I ready to change my story, right? Remember, self-protection, it's necessary, but it has its limits. Sometimes your brain's protective mechanisms hold you back from living fully, from feeling free and joyful and open, and they can even damage your relationships. You have agency, so use it. Let's apply this to a workplace situation. I just want to illustrate this a little bit more. I want you to imagine a scenario where you have a very direct manager who gives you feedback that feels a little bit sharp at times. In all fairness, this manager seems like a good person and you believe they actually want to support you in doing your best. But it's a person who cuts to the chase and is often all business, not a lot of soft stuff, so to speak. You're a person who's very kind and polite, and you value relationships, and you like to take the time to soften your message, especially when giving feedback. So here's the scene. You're trying to develop a new employee program, and you build an awesome slide deck that describes your approach, and you take it to your manager, okay, eager to share. And in seconds, your manager deconstructs it and derails your presentation. You leave the meeting feeling deflated, embarrassed, frustrated, a little sadness, and some anger. These feelings are valid. So just sit with that for a moment, okay? You worked hard on something and you didn't get a chance to really even explain it. It feels frustrating that the conversation seems one sided at times. And honestly, that tone reminds you a little bit of your family life growing up. It's a mixed bag for sure. So it makes sense to feel all the feelings that you're having. And for a few moments, you're telling yourself that you really dislike this manager and you wish they'd be a little bit more patient. And maybe it's time to look for another job and probably some other things, right? But you do the wise thing. You go for a walk, you decompress a bit, and eventually you examine your story and you open up a little bit to a different story. You think, you know, every time this has happened, I actually improve the final product. And if I'm being honest, some of that feedback was spot on. I can actually see how I can make this program a lot better. And then you think, I've never actually had a manager who was so direct or who was actually as forward thinking as this manager. And I've become much better at my role under this manager. Maybe there's something to this. Then you might evaluate, I'm not really ready to leave this job. It's not a good time for that. I think I have more to learn here. So after a little break, you go back to the presentation, you refine it, and now you're much more confident. As you prepare to present it again to your manager, you understandably feel a little nervous and some anxiety, but you also feel courage and excitement because now the program is even better. So you set up another meeting with your manager and you go for it. Okay, so that's a happy ending type of story, but it's also a great example of how we can change our outcomes by just sitting with our feelings and the stories behind those feelings and then transforming them based on the outcome that we want. As leaders, emotional awareness is essential because our emotions impact others. Emotions are genuinely contagious. Our brains unconsciously read and reflect the emotional states of those around us. That is why being around a chronically negative person is so draining, right? Despite your efforts to stay positive and forward looking, it's energetically exhausting. And when you spend all your energy in self protection mode or overcoming negativity, you have far less capacity to adventure forth and conquer new frontiers, which I want that freedom for all of you. Research also confirms that optimism is a crucial component for effective leadership. People look to leaders to understand whether they should be afraid, right? They look to leaders to know how to move forward. We need to be emotionally astute so that we can meet the moment and convey realistic optimism. Like, we don't want to be disconnected from reality or the hard emotions so that we seem out of touch, but we need to be able to be present with current emotions, right? And look toward a positive future. Both things can be true. This is such a rich topic that I'm absolutely certain we'll explore it in many future episodes. For now, remember that we need to be very conscious about how to show up in ways that serve ourselves, our teams, and our organizations. And it all starts with self-awareness. So I'm excited to share that we'll soon be bringing guests onto the podcast. And one guest I'm looking forward to introducing to you is Allison Livingston, who is exceptionally skilled at helping people develop emotional awareness. Allison is a parenting coach who helps parents in the early years bring emotional awareness to themselves, their families, and their interactions with their children. She is a living example of the transformative nature of this work, and she coaches parents to connect more deeply and achieve remarkable results that change families' lives. So she's going to share her 5 steps to connect methodology. And even though, she focuses on parents, these skills are absolutely essential for effective leadership, and we will be talking about it in that context. So stay tuned for that conversation. And until then, I encourage you to check in with yourself. Set a timer, do an emotional check-in, identify what you're feeling, consider the story behind those feelings, and ask, how is this serving me, right? Then take a deep breath, release that feeling, and welcome the next one. Remember, feelings are temporary. Literally, we just cycle through feelings every few seconds or minutes, honestly. And we can move through them quickly if we allow ourselves to do so. Okay, if we allow it, we can also get stuck if we're not careful. There's really nothing to fear. We don't have to get stuck, though we've all known people who do. Getting stuck often happens when we don't follow this all the way through. We don't acknowledge the story behind our emotions. When you find yourself stuck, it's a sign that your current emotional state has something to tell you, and you should pay attention, but then consider whether it's time to change your story. So that is it for today. If this episode helped you, please share it with someone else who might benefit. And don't forget to visit my website for plenty of additional leadership resources. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. And until next week, go lead the way. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. To learn more about my services and for lots of free resources and additional tools to enrich your journey, visit my website and subscribe to my newsletter at clairelaughlin.com. If you have a question about leadership, teams, or organizational culture you'd like me to address on the podcast, please reach out to me at support@clairelaughlin.com and connect with me on social channels at Claire Laughlin Consulting. Until next time, lead the way.